Hey friends, welcome to Homegrown Florida. I'm Patrina. About 2 years ago, I did a video and a short video on how I planted all of my fruit trees, and I was told that I was planting them wrong and that they would all die. Clearly that's not the case. These guys just came out of dormancy and they're doing quite well. In fact, many of them fruited the first year. I think it's important to talk about how I planted them, why I planted them the way that I did, and then also we're going to get into how to care for your fruit trees, especially in a place like Florida down here where it's hot, humid, and we have a lot of sand for soil. But before we jump into the fruit trees, I wanted to announce something super exciting. I am beyond ecstatic that my book, this is a proof of the physical book. I don't have the physical book out yet, but I do have the ebook available on my website. If you go to my website, homegrownfloridagarden.com, and then go up to the menu and hit store, it's going to bring you to my Shopify store where I am selling this ebook. There's also a buy button on the front page of my website if you'd rather do it that way. When I first started gardening, I wanted a place where I could go and say, how do I plant lettuce? And it would tell me everything I needed to know from a Florida perspective. So I couldn't find that. I had looked and scoured all over the internet and could not find what I was looking for, so I wrote it myself. Not only does it have everything you ever wanted to know about when to plant, how to plant, but it also has all the things that I tested in my garden, like varieties, pest management, and disease management for every single vegetable. Every chapter has a vegetable and it highlights everything that you ever needed to know. So make sure to go to my store and check out this ebook. So the first step in planting fruit trees is going to be picking the right tree for your area. So different parts of the country will have different requirements of what you can grow and what you can't grow. Like for example, down here in Florida, you can grow apples, but it's mainly for people in North Florida because the amount of chill hours that tree is required. But say for example, I don't know, avocados. North Florida doesn't necessarily have the best options when it comes to growing avocado, although there are a few cold tolerant ones, but certainly you're not going to be growing avocados, say in Michigan, because that is a tropical fruit. So we're going to put these fruits into two categories first. We're going to talk about fruits that require chill hours and fruits that are tropical, that don't require chill hours. This guy behind me, this is a stone fruit, this is a peach. So peaches, plums, nectarines, and then you have things like apples, pears, your berries like your blueberries, your blackberries, your raspberries. All of those are types of trees that require chill hours. And chill hours is the number of hours below, I think it's either 40 or 45 degrees that your area gets. So where I live here in Spring Hill, Florida, I get about, it ranges anywhere from 150 to 250 chill hours. I think this year we got close to like 300 because it was just super cold here this winter. It's a little different, but normally it ranges from 150 to 250. So when I go to look for a tree or a variety for my peaches, for example, I need to look for a variety that sits hopefully somewhere in the middle of that. And that's where this one comes in. This is called a tropical beauty, and it requires 200 hours of chill hours. Now, I know somebody in Sarasota that's growing this exact same tree and she still gets fruit, and she only gets about 50 hours. So she's chancing it that maybe on the years that she has a nicer winter or a cooler winter, she's going to get more fruit than the years that maybe she doesn't. But I strongly encourage you to really focus on how many chill hours you have in your area before picking one, because you don't want to grow this big beautiful tree and then it not flower or fruit because it didn't get the chill hours it requires. Now the next side of it is going to be tropical fruits. That's going to be things like bananas, papayas, avocados, mangoes. Oh, there's so many and they're so wonderful. Even pineapples, like there are so many, jaboticabas, like I could keep going on. And some of them are probably not as familiar to you, like the jujube or the Jamaican cherry. These are fruits that they don't typically sell in the grocery store because they just don't keep very well. The same goes for like mulberries, although mulberries can grow pretty much across the entire United States, depending on your zone, depends on which one you want to get. But these tropical fruits like the bananas, the papayas, the mangoes, the avocados, then you have to get into how much cold tolerance they have. So if you're down in South Florida, you could pretty much grow them all. When you're in Central Florida, depending on where you are in Central Florida, will depend on if you get frost during the winter. And if you get frost, then you want to look for varieties that have some cold tolerance. Even though we don't get a lot of cold here in Central Florida or even in North Florida, we do get some, and sometimes we get a lot, like our friends up in Pensacola who got like 6 inches of snow this last winter. They probably lost some of their fruit trees because some of them are just not that cold tolerant. Now you don't have to worry about cold tolerance with the chill hour ones. They generally can manage for the most part. Of course, there is a maximum for them, but I very much doubt you're going to get to the maximum, even if you were like Pensacola with all the cold weather. But the tropical trees, they definitely have a top maximum. So my avocado out front, we got down to 29 degrees, and it's a day avocado, so it has some cold tolerance. It's not like the highest cold tolerance avocado you can get. I got it because I liked that it has a Hass flavor. But it usually doesn't like below 32, and it got down to 29. Thankfully, over the last couple years, it's been in the ground and it has been growing, and it's been, you know, getting it a nice deep root system. So it's matured quite a bit. So it is going to live through that 29 degrees we just put it through. But if it were younger, it would be a concern for me to have that out there without wrapping it or covering it. So after you've picked the fruit tree that you want, now you need to think about how to plant it. So the best time to plant fruit trees, especially down here in Florida, is going to be, well, pretty much anywhere, I think, not just Florida, but it's going to be anytime after your last frost date. And for us here in the South, where we get really intense summers, you really want to do it as close to that last frost date as possible to get the tree acclimated and adjusted before you hit your super hot summer temperatures. So March is where it's at to get your fruit trees in the ground down here in the South. Now here's where things get controversial, because the way that I plant my fruit trees is very different than the way that other people plant their fruit trees. And the reason for that is it really depends on your soil. So down here in Florida, we have almost exclusively, there are some areas that don't, but almost exclusively we have sand. And for me in my area, I have sugar sand. I'm very close to the beach, like within 5 miles. So when you dig down past our like construction grade dirt that was placed here when the house was built, you get nothing but sugar sand. And that, and even, I mean, you have construction dirt and then you have sugar sand. It's really like completely devoid of any kind of nutrients. So the way that I start my fruit trees in this kind of environment is I dig a hole. And you're still gonna go by the same concept of 2 times wide by 2 times deep as best you can. You're going to backfill some of that dirt, not just with the dirt, the native soil, but I also mix in some compost. And with this, I don't like to use my good compost, like my home compost. That's almost too rich, but I'll go to the store and get some of the Black Cow or that generic Black Cow compost that they sell. And I'll mix that in with the native dirt in the hole. Then you place your plant into the hole. Make sure that your plant is at least a half a foot above the ground level, because what's going to happen is that tree is going to sink over time, and once it's at its stable place, after it's done sinking within a year, you want it to still be a few inches above the soil line so that water kind of rinses off, versus what will happen is it will sink and then it will create like a bowl down there and that's where all the water will accumulate. And for some trees are super sensitive to that, like my avocado tree, it's buried on a mound. I actually went a foot above ground level on that one because I knew he absolutely hates having wet feet. That's the case with some tropical plants that you have to think about. The next thing I do after I've placed it in the hole is I actually fill that hole up with water. You can do it before or after you've placed a tree in the hole, but I fill it up twice. This was wild to some people that saw my short video. They were like, how are you putting that much water in the soil and it's just draining? Well, it's because it's sand, guys. That's why I add some of the nutrients, because sand has very little nutrients, but also because that nutrient or that compost helps hold on to some water down there. That's one of the main reasons why I put that bag generic compost down into the planting hole, is it will hold some of the water there. Because even though it rains like crazy here, I think it's like the #1 state for rain, because we have nothing but sand in our soil, it just goes right down. This is one reason why when it floods here from the hurricanes, it's only flooded for like, I don't know, 12 to 24 hours, and then all the water recedes. It either soaks down through all the sand or it recedes off. It's pretty wild. And I think I got so many comments about that, was that I filled it up twice within 15 minutes and it just soaks right on through. So then after you filled it up twice, to try to get as much water down there as possible and to get your compost wet along with your native soil, then you place your tree down there if you haven't already. And then you're gonna backfill that native sand. And what I like to do is I put a little layer of that compost on top along with some fertilizer. And I would stick with an organic fruit fertilizer because I think that it's a little less strong than the synthetic ones. And it feeds it slowly over time because it is a granular fertilizer. It feeds you know, over several months. And fruit trees actually don't need a lot of fertilizer, but we're going to talk about that in a second. Once you've raked all that on top, I usually create a perimeter. I have St. Augustine grass and it loves to crawl, but with a perimeter, it does block it and I can catch it if it tries to leap into the center. And then I put a pine bark nugget mulch, but really any mulch will do, but I usually stick with the large mulches so that it takes a lot more time to break down. You don't want this breaking down. You almost don't want this soil to become so enriched like we do in our beds. You want it slightly enriched. Too enriched means you're gonna get a nice, big, beautiful, green, bushy tree that's gonna look super healthy, and then it's never gonna flower, which means it's never gonna produce fruit. That's a problem. But let's get into it. How do we care for these trees once they're in the ground? So once you plant these guys, immediately water them. It seems like a lot of water, but trust me, those first few weeks, they're gonna need it. So what I usually did was I would water them every other day for that first week, and then I start backing it down. So then it became like every 2 days, then it became every 3 days. And I just kind of watched the tree and I monitored it. And usually within the first month, I've backed it down to where my sprinkler system is doing its watering for them. And that's all I've ever done. Now, this is why it's important to start them in March versus maybe planting them in June. Because if you plant them in June or July when it's very hot and maybe before our rains have started, or even our rains had just started maybe, it's not going to get enough water because those roots are still very sensitive and they're just beneath the surface. They haven't branched out. They haven't gone down yet. And so you're going to be watering them for a lot longer. You're going to be watering them for months that way. This way, if you start getting them watered quickly and then you start backing that water off as quickly as possible, as long as the trees don't look like they're wilting or stressed or anything, start backing it down. Those roots are going to start going down and reaching deep to try to find more water. And you're going to be getting it down there into like our aquifers and stuff and trying to get deep down to where that water's being stored underneath the sand. I think a lot of people think that by putting that compost in there mixed with the native soil, that compost is going to hold all the water and the roots are going to stay right there. But like I said, we have a different kind of climate here and we have a different kind of soil. Because our soil is so sandy, that compost just can't hold enough of it in place. It's almost like a little bit of a band-aid to hold it in place just while it's getting adjusted, just that first month. And then after that, it branches out. Those roots, I have found them because we've dug up other parts of the yard and I find these guys sprawled everywhere. We've found ones in our trees up front that we plant the exact same way. My husband dug out to put in a French drain, found them all down there, all over the place. They spread very aggressively to try to find water, but you want them to do that because the more that they spread and the more that they get down deep, the stronger base they're going to have, which is going to help you when it comes to hurricanes. And also, when we go through droughts and maybe the county doesn't want us to water as much, these guys are getting it so deep below now that they don't really care about watering from overhead. So you don't want to baby them for too long. You want them to stand on their own 2 feet, but you do need to monitor them, keep an eye on them, because if they start to show stress, you need to come back and help them. Do this in baby steps. It kind of requires a lot of effort in the beginning, but once you get past that first 6 months of these guys, you'll never have to worry about them again. I don't ever have to worry about watering these guys ever. Now, fertilizing is a different thing. Like I mentioned earlier, we put a little bit of fertilizer on top when we put them in, just to give them a little bit of food while they're getting settled. But typically, I fertilize mine twice a year. Some people do it 3 times a year. I don't really feel that that's necessary in my area, but you may see it in yours. So I fertilize them right at bud break. So usually these plants have no leaves on them come this time, but we had a little bit warmer of a spring this season and now they're completely full of leaves. But when I first start seeing the buds of the leaves break on the branches, you'll see them like tiny little pieces of yellow, or the flowers are starting to come out. That's when I put down the first round of fertilizer, and I just use like 2 tablespoons of plant, maybe 2 to 4 tablespoons, 1/4 of a cup, like a very small amount. And I usually use the organic fertilizers, not the synthetics. I feel like the synthetics are a little too strong. But if all you have is synthetic, just use less than what they say, I think. You know, maybe try what they say and then back it down if it seems a little aggressive. And the way you'll know it's aggressive is you get this big, beautiful green tree that looks healthy, but it doesn't flower or fruit. that's usually what happens. This guy has flowered and fruited magnificently with the tiny bit of fertilizer that I give it. Now, typically what I do is after I put that first application down, then I wait until the fruit is almost ready to be picked. That's when I put the second one down, whenever that might be. It's different for different plants. So these mulberries, they'll be ready to be harvested within a few weeks, but my avocados, it's going to take till September before they're ready. So I generally don't feed them until it's getting ready for their fruit to be picked or close to that time frame. And the reason why I do it at that moment is because they've put all their effort and energy into creating the fruit, the flowers, ripening the fruit, you know, and then when you take all the fruit off, you know, they kind of are like exhausted. And so having a little bit of food right at that point kind of invigorates them to focus on getting kind of leafy and bushy and green, so that way next year they're nice and super healthy and ready to produce again. The next thing we have to talk about is going to be thinning and pruning. So pruning is a really good thing that you can do for your trees. Not only should you be pruning the things off that are dead or dying during the winter season, but you also need to be pruning for shape. This guy right here, he's just kind of coming out of winter, so he's still got some red leaves and he's looking a little crappy because we had a cold winter, and he's a tropical plant. And so why he is in a pot by my pool, because he tends to like the warmth from the pool. He doesn't like anything under 40 degrees. He's a jaboticaba. But another thing with these jaboticabas is that their fruit actually grow along the stem. They're called a tree grape. I think they're so cool. I think they're from Brazil. I might be wrong about that. I think they're called a Brazilian tree grape because it looks like grapes and they actually taste like grapes, but with a thicker skin. But they grow along the trunk of the tree. So you want to get light into the trunk of the tree so that it ripens the fruit, because the fruit needs sunlight to ripen. Almost all fruits do. So the best way to do that is to do some thinning cuts. And what this means is you're thinning out some of the really dense parts of the tree so that it can get some light into the center. I do this with all my trees. In fact, I love pruning my trees. I feel like my trees are way more productive because I prune them. And I think there's a lot of scientific evidence out there that supports that. You're keeping the tree smaller, so it has less that it has to do when it comes to the leaves and the branch and the repairs and everything that it does in its life cycle. And it has more energy and more food to put into the fruit. So you're making a sweeter, better, bigger, more productive tree when it comes to the fruit. And that's what we're after, right? Now, if you just want a beautiful tree, don't worry about it. You know, just let it grow big. It probably will still produce a lot. The other reason why I really like pruning is to keep my trees small. So one of the reasons is so that I can keep them in pots for these tropical trees that aren't really known for doing very well in my area, or to keep them small because I want to be able to grow a lot of fruit trees. There's a book called Grow a Little Fruit Tree. Absolutely love the book. Definitely check it up down in the description. But that book talks about keeping the trees small so that you can grow more of them. So if you wanted to grow every citrus under the sun, but you have a 1/4 of an acre lot like I have, then you don't have a lot of room. So the way that you can do that is by growing them closer together and keeping them small. The smaller you keep your tree, the less space it needs. It doesn't need the full 20 feet between them. Some put them at like 6 feet apart. I put them at 12 because I had a little more space to be able to do that. Although I'm rethinking that decision because I could totally put a lot more trees in my lot if I didn't have them at 12 feet across. But I digress. They're healthy, they're happy. I'm going to leave them with the 12 feet. Now there is a swap out that you have to give here. Whenever you are growing them small, compact, and close together, it is going to be a trade-off that you are going to lose some productivity. But if you don't have a lot of space or a lot of land, this is a good alternative to being able to grow lots of different fruits. Now when I say you're going to get less, let me just give you an example. My peach tree should produce, I believe, somewhere between 300 and like 600 peaches, like a ridiculous amount. We love peaches. We jokingly call my husband the peach monster because he will eat 600 peaches if our peachy produced that many. But she usually produces between 200 and 300 peaches. So she's producing half as much, but you guys think about it. Do you want 600 peaches or do you want 300 peaches and 300 plums? Because that's basically what I'm doing. In this space that I would have given one adult peach tree, I'm giving 2 fruit trees and I'm getting half the production. But That means I'm getting 2 different fruits and I'm still getting 300 peaches, right? I'm still getting 300 plums. Like, that's a lot of peaches and plums. It's plenty enough to give away, to eat fresh, and then also to can. So for us and our little family here of just 2, yeah, it is plenty for us. But you may have a larger family, you might have more space, and you might want 600 peaches. One that also goes along with pruning is going to be thinning. And I think thinning is probably a little more important when the tree is younger than when the tree is older. I'm getting to the point with my peach tree that is now 6 years old that I don't necessarily thin her as much as I used to. But my younger trees, I do thin them. And what I mean by thinning is once it has put on fruit, you'll want to get rid of some of those baby fruits. I was gonna say it's kind of like thinning carrots, but it's worse because fruit trees only produce once. And carrots, you can do like succession plants, and you could grow lots of carrots, right? But you only have one set time that you're gonna be actually eating this fruit and producing this fruit. So taking some of it off is like, it really hurts. It hurts my heart. But it's what's best for the tree and the health of the tree in the long run. If you leave all of them on there, especially when they're young, they're trying their hardest to produce this fruit, and usually the fruit aren't going to be as good. And then on top of that, you've then stressed your tree out. It's going to become an issue when it comes to disease and pests and lots of other issues. It may not produce the next year if it's stressed too much that first year. So it's going to have problems if you're not thinking about thinning. When I talk about thinning, I'm not saying like reduce the tree by half. What I'm saying is look at each one of those pieces of fruit and make sure you have somewhere between 4 and 6 inches apart from fruit to fruit. If you look around your tree and you're like, all of them are 4 to 6 inches apart, wow, you have above average fruit tree there. It is doing what it needs to do perfectly. It gets rid of its own fruit, or maybe it doesn't fruit on the branches that it's not needing to. So you don't have to thin anything. But there are times when I have clusters of peaches and there'll be like 6 of them within 3 inches from each other. They're all like right bundled together. Well, you got to take some of them off. In fact, you got to take like 5 of them off and leave just 1. If you want to leave 2 of them in that kind of space, you're chancing it, you're going to end up with smaller fruit, but you know what, you're probably not going to harm the tree. But if you left all 6, you're going to be breaking branches. That tree's going to be depleted of nutrients faster. You're going to stress it out and it might not produce next year. So now you're only getting fruit every other year, versus if you just thinned a little bit of the tree, of the fruit, it will thank you later, especially those first 3 years that it's producing. Not the first 3 years that it's in the ground, because that's different. Sometimes fruit trees don't produce the first year. This guy takes 8 years to produce. So you have to wait 8 years, and then you have to thin it those first couple of years, 2 or 3 years. Oh, it's a commitment, I know. Most trees are not as finicky as this one. Like my peach tree produced on year 2, and it produced in abundance by year 4. So by year 5, which was last year, I didn't hardly thin any. I think I thinned maybe 12 peaches out of the 200 or 300 that were on the tree. The next thing we have to talk about when you talk about fruit trees is disease and pest management. What I've come to learn about disease and pest management when it comes to fruit trees is less is more. Doing the very bare minimum tends to be the route I go, but that's kind of how I manage all of my vegetables and fruits. I very little intervention. I let kind of the ecosystem do what it does, and that has worked out for me. Now, I know that's not the case with all fruit trees. Particularly, I'm thinking of apples. Like when people grow apples, I know that they get like wormy apples, wormy peaches, and a lot of the times there are different things that you can do, like I think it's called kaolin clay. Kaolin clay. But that is like a organic way of managing it. It basically is like a clay, a powder that you mix with some liquid and you spray it on the trees or the fruit particularly, and it coats the fruit to where if the bugs try to eat into it, it gunks up their system, and I think it starves them or they die or something. Now, the only thing that I do is I don't like wormy peaches. One year I had such a great harvest and they all had worms in them. Not all, I'm probably being dramatic. Probably 50% had worms. It was awful because you can't really eat that, but I guess you could. I didn't. So what I do is at this point, there are little tiny little peaches on this tree. They're just pollinated. Once all the flowers are gone, there's no more flowers and no more bees hanging around this tree, then I spray them with spinoside. This is probably the one intervention I still do in my garden because the worms in my garden are pretty extreme, whether it's pickle worms or these worms that get into the peaches. So I will spray all of my fruit, excluding the mulberries. I don't really treat those because even if they do get bugs, and they do get bugs, they don't really disrupt the fruit at all. I don't know why. They go in between the fruit, but you soak them and they all come out. And I know that's so gross, but they're not like buried inside, which is where I don't want to eat them. But the plums and the peaches and like the lemons and stuff like that, I will spray them with spinoside once a month while they're fruiting. When they're not fruiting, they don't get sprayed. This guy not only gets worms on him, but he also gets the Sri Lankan weevil. It's like a white weevil beetle looking thing, real tiny. Doesn't really have a lot of predators. In fact, I don't think it has any in my area, or maybe it has some, I'm not sure. But whatever predator that likes him has not figured out that they're here. It pretty much chews on my peach, my plum, and my Indian berry over there, my sherbet berry. And I don't really treat them. If I see them out here in abundance, I will hand pick them off and crush them. But honestly, at this point, the trees are pretty mature. The infestation isn't really bad. So I just let them chew on the leaves. But if you're having an issue with a certain pest, then, you know, obviously I would treat it in the least intervention to the most. Because when you move when you go from like, I found one bug, and you jump all the way to, I'm gonna just dust my whole garden in 7, you're killing everything. You're killing the good bugs that live in the soil that help feed the tree. You're killing the predator bugs that come and feast on the ones that you didn't see, that they already ate. You know, you're killing this whole ecosystem, and it's not great for your tree. Your tree really needs all of those things combined together to grow well. So if a little bug wants to chew on the leaves, I had a grasshopper living in here last year that chewed up the leaves bad. But you know, the leaves grew back, the tree was fine, and the grasshopper went on its way eventually. I didn't have to worry about it. But if I would have found like 20 grasshoppers in here, yeah, I would have had to intervene. First intervention being I would try to pick them out myself, get rid of them myself by hand. If that didn't work, then you start moving up through the organic mechanisms, right? There's spinoside, BT, neem oil, insecticidal soaps. You can use essential oils. There's a lot of different things that you can move through. And then you can get into the pesticides that actually destroy certain kinds of bugs, right? You can do beneficial nematodes. That's an organic option too. But there's a lot of different things or layers that you can go through to try to work on the pest situation without just blanketing with the worst approach. Less is more. Now, when it comes to disease, this one's tough, right? Because some trees are just naturally going to have more disease issues than others, right? And this is where we go back to the very beginning of this video where we talk about getting the right tree for your area. So not only are you looking for the right chill hours and the right cold tolerance, but what trees do well in your area. So I do a lot of research, particularly with the University of Florida. And then I go on all of the Facebook sites, and I go on all of the YouTube videos of any one of my fellow gardeners. I call my friends like Jacqueline and reach out to Jira and be like, what do you grow for this particular one? And if it grows in their area and it does well with little intervention, yeah, that's the tree that I look for. And it's hard sometimes because you're looking for a very specific tree and you want your peach tree, but then you go to Home Depot and they have peaches there, but it's not the variety that you're looking for, and then you compromise and you get that other variety and you put it in and you have issues. And you have issues with pests and with disease and not fruiting, and you just have so many issues. I really encourage you that if you are looking for a fruit tree, that you do that homework and look for varieties. Now I have on my website, Homegrown Florida Gardening, .com, where you can get your ebook. I also have a page down in the center there that talks about my favorite varieties. It includes the fruit tree varieties that I grow in my garden, so you can definitely check that out there. If you're looking for fruit trees in Florida, or really anywhere in the South, because they deliver all throughout the South, I like greendreamsfl.com. Fast growing trees. I got a mango from them recently. That's really healthy trees that they send out, and they have a good diverse selection. If you can make it, if you're living locally in the Spring Hill area, Pasco County area, Hernando, Tampa, Hillsborough, that whole area up there on 41, Green Dreams has a nursery. Pete has a beautiful nursery, and there's way more varieties at the nursery than there is just online that he ships. So if you make a little trip over to his nursery, you will not regret it bring a truck. That's what I did. I brought so many fruit trees when we went to visit him. So I hope that helps you guys in picking and getting your fruit trees. Now is the perfect time to get them in the ground. You will not regret it. They are gonna just kind of sit there for a little while and they're not gonna do much, but you know what? That year that they start producing and you eat your very first peach or your very first loquat or your very first orange, you are going to fall in love with fruit trees just like I have. Thanks for hanging out with me today, guys. Happy gardening.